about this snowy night and that nobody would be willing to come out when we have such a special speaker here, Kim Royar from Vermont Fish and Wildlife.
Yep.
I get confused between fish and wildlife and natural resources and all.
I know, it is confusing. It really is. I get confused still, and I've been with him 38 years, so. I still, yeah, right. So.
An exciting thing about Kim is that this afternoon she went over to the school and taught a class over at the school.
Oh, great.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the real benefits of having people like Kim come down, to have them go over to the school, and the kids get a sense not only of what they can do in the town, but of what jobs they might be wanting to think about. Kim was telling me one of the kids was just so enthusiastic about every single thing. You could just see them in a few years what they're going to be doing.
Was it the whole school? Or
It was the 3rd and 4th grade. It was really fun. They're so cute. Yeah, it was great. It seemed like a great school, and they were so well behaved. It was a pleasure. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to say before we get going with Kim, because I think it's really pretty important that this is a pretty significant day. For the past year, people in Dummerston have been working hard to conserve a 287-acre piece of forested land, wildlife corridor that's over in the northwestern corner of town off of Camp Arden Road. It's the end of the Putney Mountain Ridge, and now it's, as of today, it's in conservation in perpetuity. From a lot of you here and the state and all kinds of great things. So we're really, so if any of you have any questions about that, ask us later. Tomorrow night we're having a meeting. We're hoping then there's another piece that's right next to it, contiguous, in Brookline and Newfane. That's the whole side of the mountain you see as you go up Route 30. And that's the next piece. That's, I don't know if we'll ever do more than that, but if we get those two pieces, that's 626 acres. And we have a purchase and sale agreement on that. And it's just, we're going to have a big nature preserve, and it'll be just great. So if you can come to Williamsville tomorrow night, the Williamsville Hall, 7 o'clock. Great. Okay.
Ready?
All right.
Okay,
Kim, go
great.
ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I'm really excited about that property because we used to do deer carcass surveys in Camp Arden, what we called the Camp Arden Deer Yard, for many, many years. And so we have spent a lot of time in there and have always hoped that it would get conserved. So thank you. Your inspiration, really, to me. I'm always so impressed when I come to towns that are so active and get that kind of work done. So thank you. And it's great to be here to see so many people that I have known from my years with the department. It's been really fun to catch up with so many of you. So I was asked to come and talk a little bit about wildlife movement corridors in Dummerston. And I think I will find that you probably know way more about this than I do in terms of your local area. But I'm going to start by stepping back, give you some ideas about how wildlife move across the landscape in other places, and then hope that maybe when we're done, we can apply that to Dummerston. And I'm hoping that you guys will help us do that. So I'm hoping to learn from you tonight as well. So we'll start with what we call wildlife connectivity. And it's really just trying to move animals from one place on the landscape to the other. And you might ask, like, well, so what? What's the big deal? I mean, you know, can't they just get there on their own? And they used to be able to do that fairly well, but there's a lot of challenges today that make it more difficult for animals to move across the landscape. And some of these relate to habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, which is just kind of the breaking up of the landscape. We think climate change is going to affect the ability of animals to move. Invasive exotic species are often brought into an area, which make it hard for wildlife to get to the foods that they need, and pollution and sedimentation. And a lot of these things really have to do with roads and where we place roads on the landscape and how roads actually bisect habitats and large forest blocks. So you might think, well, you know, most roads, some are obviously going to cause problems. I mean, the interstate has a lot of traffic. That's probably going to really impact movement, and we all can probably see that intuitively. But roads can do quite a bit of other things. When you look here, It can restrict movement, and we often think of roads as restricting movement of terrestrial animals, and we don't think of them as restricting movement of aquatic animals, but there's a road on top of this culvert, and this culvert now is basically a dam. I mean, fish or other invertebrate aquatics can no longer get up beyond that culvert. And so in this case, replacing that culvert so it's a bridge or it's embedded in the stream so that fish passage goes back and forth is part of the whole anti-fragmentation issue. But also, in this case, this allows for movement under a road, and an animal doesn't have to go up over the road to get through that area. So it can restrict movement. We find in some of our genetics work around the state that it actually isolates populations. Some roads, 89 is one, Route 9 can be one, Route 4 can be another, where we see that the genetic makeup of some of our species are isolated enough that we can actually distinguish subpopulations of those species based on what we think are roads. They obviously, we can cause direct mortality. You've all driven roads and seen dead animals on the side of the road that have gotten hit by cars. It can change the species that live along or near the road just by the type of habitats that are there. It influences what species live on the landscape where. It increases the spread of invasives, in many cases those invasives are brought in on the tires of our cars or just by people, and roads allow that to happen. And you know, it sometimes alters the way we connect and see land, so it even influences the way people think about the land. So as the Fish and Wildlife Department, we're responsible for what is your public trust, for just trying to make sure that we have sustainable populations and the habitats for all these populations of about 30,000 species in Vermont, including invertebrates and all the way up to large mammals. And almost all of these species need some kind of connectivity. They need to be able to move from one place to another. Some more slowly than others, like maybe the reptiles, the turtles. I mean, the fisher moves a lot faster in a lot larger space. But again, fish, but amphibians, things like mink, even birds need connectivity, and mussels. So, you know, trying to figure out how do you provide connectivity for all of these different species really takes looking at it at different scales. So we start with the largest scale, and we'll get down to the Dummerston scale. But we're starting with the largest scale. And when you look at Vermont, and we think of little old Vermont as maybe not playing a very big role, but regionally, we're a keystone state. When you think about the fact that we connect the Adirondacks to northern New Hampshire, we connect Massachusetts to Canada, and so maintaining landscape connectivity in Vermont in these ways is critical to the surrounding states and even another country. So it's a pretty important state where we're placed, and we're lucky because we have public lands up and down the Green Mountain Spine that sort of give us the basis for connecting Massachusetts to Canada, and it's not going to take a whole lot to actually do these side connectors that kind of keep animals moving on a much broader, on the broadest scale. And as an example, these are large forest blocks. This was a precursor to maybe many of you have heard of BioFinder, where we've got large forest blocks mapped with smaller blocks and smaller blocks. This was the first stage of that. This is a landscape perspective. And about 30 years ago, before we even were able to map through GIS, we had magic markers. We were using maps with magic markers. We noticed that this area right in here, this is Killington ski area up here, and Route 155 right here through Mount Holly. And these are basically, the red are owned by the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service. And we realized that there was a lot of opportunity for fragmentation in between because of the pressure from the ski areas, because Okemos south and Killington was north. And so for the last 30 years, we've actually worked with a bunch of partners, many partners. We've secured about 30,000 acres in that little corridor, well, it's a big corridor between 155 and Route 4. And the second to last block that connects the Forest Service here to state land over here was just purchased by the, well, with the help of the town of Mount Holly and the Vermont Land Trust. And it's going to go into state ownership. So, and they actually also raised enough money to take down the house that was on the property. These kinds of things, which you guys are working towards, can really happen. And when they happen, they can have a real effect on the rest of the entire state. So that's the big, larger scale. Then we can look at a regional scale. Dummerston is right here. And you can see these large forest blocks. But there's connectivity between Dummerston and the Forest Service in this way. When you go to some of the smaller blocks, there's actually potential for connectivity across the Connecticut River, right there. I don't want to underplay the value of even those areas that aren't mapped as large forest blocks. They're not mapped because they're just smaller blocks in there, but they can still be connected up as well and provide some movement right through across the Connecticut River here. But you can see there's opportunities for some regional cooperation here. And then here's Dummerston. As we zoom in, you can see this, this piece right here is that piece right there. And then the larger forest block is just north of that. And then this is just different colors. You can see those are the same things, but these show you the blocks as you go all the way over to the interstate and over to the Connecticut River. So there's opportunities to link up all of those blocks by making sure, by trying to identify where are the best places for animals to move across the road. So on a local perspective, what you're really trying to do is you identify those large forest blocks like these, which are already pretty much done in most of the towns. And then you've got this right here, which is a connector block. So that's important. But then you've got to identify where are the animals actually crossing the road. So in this case, it's here, here, and here that keep all three of these large forest blocks connected up. And so it's really like putting the pieces of the puzzle together, figuring out where are these blocks that are getting utilized, and then how do we link them all up together. And so there's some attributes of these connecting corridors, and this is what we're going to try to apply to Dummerston, because this is, you know, the landscape of Dummerston much better than I do. But a lot of times, we're trying to connect up these large forest blocks, and they're often connected by either what we call riparian corridors, streams, and stream buffers might connect these large forest blocks, and I'll show you some examples of how those kinds of habitats get used by some of these animals. Heights of land where you have, you know, like sometimes you'll go up a hill on a road and you come to the point where you're at the height of what we call the height of land, and then you start going back downhill. Sometimes we find that our bear and moose cross right at those heights of land where it's like a saddle between two ridges. Where specific habitats meet across the road, and I'll show you some examples of that, but often you'll notice that there's places where forest meets forest on two sides of the road, and that's often a place where it's maybe field or development on both sides. You're looking for places like that. Well-placed culverts or bridges can be natural crossing areas. Places where you don't have current existing infrastructure, also a good place to look. And how big the parcels are make a difference sometimes too. So we'll go through some of these. This is an example of a riparian corridor. This is just where there's a river or a stream with forested habitat on both sides. These are used by a lot of different wildlife to move across the landscape. Anywhere from 50 to 300 feet from the edge of that wet area, the stream bank, is often an area that animals will move and use. If you look at this piece, where would you think animals might cross this road here? If you were just looking, you don't know anything really, you're just trying to figure out where would an animal cross the road? Yeah. Right here? Yeah, right here. That's probably a good spot. Yep. And actually, there, probably, and there, and then the top left. Probably any one of those spots would be, because those are the places where you've got habitats that meet on both sides of the road. And I'll show you some bobcats that actually cross in areas like that. And this is Fairleigh Town Forest and the Bradford Town Forest. This is what I meant by where you have protected lands on either side of the road. And it makes sense that if you were trying to maintain a crossing, you try to identify an area that keeps that state land or that conserved land protected. This is an actual crossing. This is Okemo. And there's actually, when you drive 103 here, there's actually now bear crossing signs because this is where they are crossing 103 most frequently. I mean, it's not perfect. Sometimes they cross further down or over a little further, but in general, this is where they're crossing that road. And it makes sense when you see the development on this side and the development on this side. This is what, and it's the height of land as well.
How long is that? Inside that rectangle? Road?
Well, this is the top of Okemo right here. That's just an example. I mean, we know we have bears down here, and we know we have bears living up here, but they kind of funnel in right through here, through this rectangle. And, I would say from the top down is maybe 1/2 to 3/4 of a mile, something like that. And again, well-placed bridges and culverts. We work pretty closely with the Agency of Transportation, and they are pretty open to trying to improve connectivity. They can't afford, obviously, to tear out every culvert and every poorly done bridge, but if they are working on a road section and it has some value for wildlife, they'll actually work to try to put in a structure that will allow for movement. And they've actually got a graduate student who's starting this semester who's going to try to identify the highest priority locations for improved crossing areas on the roads. So our Agency of Transportation is actually quite progressive, and when we have conferences with other states, they're quite jealous of our Agency of Transportation. And this is a picture of, this is down on Route 9 in Searsburg. Can anybody tell me what this is? It looks like a bobcat. It actually is not. You're not going to believe this. It's a lynx. This is a lynx, and it's going through some underpasses that were put in on Route 9 for movement of bears and bobcats and fisher, and they put cameras out and got a picture of a lynx.
Where's the link?
This is Searsburg. I can show you. Oh, can you see that? This is the lynx right there. So his tail, which I'll show you. I have a lynx here. I'll show you the difference between the lynx and the bobcat. But he's got very large feet. This is his head, and this is his tail. And those are his back legs. Okay? Yeah. It isn't the easiest picture to see, but it looks like water. It's not. Well, there might be. I don't think so, because it's going under an underpass. So I think it's actually just a reflection off the road, maybe, or something. But it does look like water. I don't think this was. I think this was in the spring or fall. I can't remember. But we got a picture of a lynx from Londonderry either right before or right after this picture was taken, and I suspect it was the same lynx, because we haven't had. I mean, we've had very, very few lynx in Vermont in the last 20 years. We haven't had lynx for 100 or 200 years, but we had about 12 confirmed sightings of lynx in the last 10 or 12 years. It has now dropped off again, I think primarily when, I think it was spruce budworm that went through, wasn't it, Lynn or Charlie, through Maine, killed off a bunch of their trees over there. They did a lot of salvage cutting, they had a lot of regen, a lot of snowshoe hare. The lynx population over there exploded, and we ended up getting, because we had connectivity, we got lynx into Vermont from Maine, and actually to have lynx in Vermont, we have to maintain that connectivity, because that's where they're going to come from.
So we have hares and not rabbits?
We have both, but
Feed on hares.
they feed on hares, They feed, and we have mostly, the hares are mostly in the spruce fir mountain areas. We'll have them down slope sometimes, but the rabbits generally be in the Champlain Valley. I don't know, do you guys have rabbits here too? Yeah.
They feed about 90% on.
Hare, yeah, yeah. I mean, he was truly not in a, I mean, he was wandering, looking for a place to settle, maybe looking for a female or, so this was not a healthy situation for this animal, but you know, that's what they do when they're kind of out there looking for a home range. So this is, the next thing is, this is a bobcat. We did a bobcat study with University of Vermont Cooperative Research Unit, and we collared cats. This was in the early 2000s, and you don't really have to analyze this data to get a sense of how that cat is using the landscape. The dots are the cat's locations, and we were taking the locations at dawn and dusk every 20 minutes, and then every other day, every 5 hours. And so we really, because we wanted to see how they were crossing roads and how they were moving. You can see this animal is not using the fields, is he? Not at all.
Is this all one animal?
That's all one animal. This is a male animal. This is Lake Champlain over here. This is near Shelburne Farms, actually. But you can see where he's moving through the fields in these hedgerows. He's using the hedgerows as connectivity. And what we found, we had a graduate student who analyzed those movements, and she found that when they were moving through habitats that were lower quality on either side, such as here, they moved faster than when they were in the scrub or the forested portion. So they were strictly picking those areas to move across and through areas they did not want to be in. So here's another example. You can see this cat here. This is a wet spot across this road. And you can see, again, when we talk about where two habitats meet, right? There's really no other place here for that animal to cross the road. It's picking, it actually has preference for this type of habitat, and it's moving across the road and it's moving from here to here through the field, through this hedgerow, and then across the road in the shrubby area where it's not going to be seen. I mean, it's vulnerable when it's crossing this road. You can see right there, it's right on the road. If a car came along, it might get hit, but, and then this is kind of interesting. Anybody want to take a guess as to what this is? Railroad tracks. Railroad tracks appear to provide some connectivity for bobcats through the Champlain Valley. We had several cats who used railroad tracks to get through suboptimal habitat. And it makes sense when you think about it, because there's not a lot of human disturbance on a railroad track. You get a train through there once in a while. And so you often have some shrubby habitats along either side of the railroad track, but it's not, you know, you're not going to run into a lot of people. And so they would go through the landscape using these railroad tracks. And here again, you can see it using that shrubby habitat to cross this road right here, because there's really no other place to get across. Again, railroad track right here. This cat's using the railroad track again to move through this development area. There's the railroad track going right through the development. They don't spend any time in the developed area at all. They'll go up to the edge, but they don't spend time there. But they use that track to get through if they have to. Another hedgerow providing a pretty marginal crossing across that road. And then again, this is a riparian corridor they're using to get under this bridge right here. So they're going under the road here, which is a much safer choice than going over the road. Again, another riparian corridor, and there you can see they're using the side where there's a buffer, where there's some vegetation. They're not using this side as often because it's just more, they're more exposed. And here's one that you might all have driven through, and you might have not ever noticed, but this is Route 7, right in Shelburne. This is the La Platte River, and these cats, several of them, there's a bridge here. would move up and down this river to cross Shelburne Road right here, between the two developments here, this one here and this one here. And this is much more undeveloped on this side, but to get to food resources on both sides, they would go underneath Route 7. So again, we found that bobcats would travel almost a mile an hour and almost 19 to 20 miles in a 24-hour period. So they are moving all the time. And in order for them to get to the habitats that they need, chances are they're going to have to cross a road, and figuring out how to get them safely from one side to the other and maintain that connectivity is part of what we were trying to figure out with this study. The males travel faster than the females, and they all tend to travel dawn or dusk or at night more than they do during the day. And again, like I mentioned before, their speed increased when they were using forested strips that were surrounded by non-forested habitat. So there was an assumption there that that wasn't habitat that they really liked or wanted to use. It was just getting them from one place to the other. And we mapped actually the bobcats that have been roadkill, that have been hit by cars in the last 20 years or so. And you can see the study area was right here. But you can see these towns had, in the last 20 years, have had 5 cats each killed by cars. So it looks like we suspect we have the highest bobcat population over here than in any other part of the state, but there also probably are more roads and less cover. But clearly there's something going on over here. We're not seeing the same mortality on the eastern side of the state as we are seeing on the western side of the state. So there needs to be some work over there done in regards to that. And this is a collared cat that the graduate student happened to be able to take as he's crossing Route 7 with the car coming. It's pretty indicative of what can happen to an animal when they are trying to move across a road. So we'll switch now to black bears. And these are, you guys probably are aware of the study that's going on in the Searsburg area around the wind towers that are being put in there. So the wind towers are these purple things, and these are beach stands. And there's actually, you can't see it because this bear's points are all over the beach stand and the wind towers in here. But this is a male bear, and you can see he's pretty enclosed by in this case, his home range is defined by roads pretty much. And that's often the case with bears, is their main core home range is defined by major roads. So this is Route 9 and 8 and 100, and those are the outline of this guy's roads. But in 2017, we had a really good beech nut year, but it looks like this same bear, this is the same bear in this year, went up to the beach stands, and they were actually they were constructing the wind towers at that point. And this is pretty preliminary. We haven't done any analysis, but you could maybe guess that the disturbance from those wind towers sort of kicked him out. The construction of the wind towers kicked him out, and he moved all the way to Brattleboro for a brief period of time. So he crossed quite a few roads on his way there and back, and I think actually Jackie, the woman who's doing the study, actually mapped it. So you can see he started here, went up like this, crossed here, came down, kind of wound his way around, spent a little time over. I don't know what's going on over in this end of Brattleboro. If any of you know, he's doing something over there. Maybe there's a nice bird feeder, I don't know. And then he left and came back, spent a little time right here, and down, and wound his way back to his home range and ended right here. So it's, when there's a bad mast year, when we don't have a lot of nut production, that's when these animals really move, and trying to figure out how can you get them across the landscape safely to get from the one food supply to another food supply is really what the purpose of connectivity is. This is another black bear there's corn over here. So he came over, and when bears get into corn, that's not always healthy for them in terms of they often get shot because, farmers don't like bears in their corn, understandably. But he came over here, spent some time in these beech stands, and then in a bad beech nut year came over here and got in the corn. But again, he's moving across quite a few roads to get there, and trying to figure out where he is actually crossing those roads would be real helpful in terms of making sure that we have structure there that makes it easier for him to move.
Do they like hickory?
Yeah, they'll eat acorns. In fact, some of these bears actually go south into Massachusetts on a piece. I think I have a slide where they go into Massachusetts to get to acorns and hickory. Yep, they'll eat any kind of mast that's available. But again, this is a year where there's a good beech nut crop, and I think in this case, he came back from sort of over in the corn area, came up, but only spent a very short amount of time. So that's September 24th, he hit the top of the beech stand at 10:23 p.m. and then came down around, and on the next day by 6 o'clock he was gone and went back again. So again, this was during the project, active construction of the project, that he might have gotten up there and said, well, okay, this is really not going to be a place I'm going to hang out. And he went back to the west. This is another male bear who started out again sort of over in the Hoosick area and came up into the beech stand. Again, this is during the active construction, went right through the beech stand again, and then back up into the Forest Service property, but then across Route 7, and then, into New York, and down and back across Route 7 again north of Shaftesbury, and then back down and across Route 9. So there's lots of opportunities for these animals to get hit by a car. Yeah?
How much of this is memory from when they were brought up? In other words, that bear that started near New York and came back to the beach stand, might he have been born there and came back to the memory?
There is fidelity to those beech stands to some degree. So if his mother brought him to that beech stand, chances are he's going to go back to that beech stand. And there might be multiple bears that come into that same beech stand over a period of time. They may have distinct home ranges to some degree, although there's a lot of overlap between the males. But during the fall, there'll be more than just a few bears in those beech stands, and it's often where they were brought as cubs. Yep. Yeah. So but they will not stay if the nuts are no good or there's no, they'll go find other, and that's when they get into people's backyards or into orchards or into corn, and they get into trouble. This is a female, and you can see she spent a lot of her time up in this is on the east side now of Route 8, and she's spending her time in that beech stand when the beech nuts are good, but when the beech nuts are not good, she goes south into Massachusetts and gets into the acorns. So, they figure out where they got to go in order to put on those fat reserves, and they just got to be able to move from one place to another. And this is another female, again, poor beech nut year. This is actually a wildlife management area right here, and she spends a lot of time in this area, and then she came down into Massachusetts, and she moves through from one of these, like if Massachusetts, maybe they're thinking about this, but connecting up their state lands here would be really beneficial because they clearly have movement from one piece of state land to another.
I have come down Route 100 on that road when I was doing home health in Reedsboro and connecting to 8
Yep.
to go to Searsburg, and had to stop for bear.
You have to
Crossing the road right at the bottom of that hill.
right where 8 comes into 100.
Almost where the park is.
Yep.
Out of Reedsboro.
Yep.
Right there and up the bank.
And it's funny because I was talking to Jackie this morning, who's the one that's been doing this collaring work, and she said that's where a lot of the crossings happen.
Right by that, whatever that little park is.
Yep. Huh. See? That's great. Again, this is just another bear, a male bear. most of his home range is in near that wildlife management area, near where you were, right, oops, sorry, right where the crossing is, where you were talking about, well, close to where you were talking about, I think. And then, because here's Route 9, right? Yeah, there's Route 9, there's Route 8. And so right in here probably, right? Yeah. But this one, again, he was going west into the corn. So, and then the last species, which I don't have many pictures of, I throw in just because this really floored me. This work was done by Dr. Roland Kays he used to be with the Albany Museum of Natural History, and he collared Fisher. These are all Fisher points, these gray points here. This is, I think it's Schenectady. And you can see, I mean, I wouldn't normally have thought a fisher would spend time in an area like this, and he's even swimming across this river here. But he's clearly using the open spaces in between these roads in this fairly developed area. And this picture here, I think this is, I don't know if this is the same animal, but you can see it's using just these forested areas surrounded by all of that. And these could be sinks. I mean, they could be dying in there. We don't know.
Cat control.
Definitely cat control. No. You are exactly right. And that might be partly what's keeping them alive. That might be their major prey source there.
I had to run down a fisher one time with my cat in his mouth.
Really? Yeah. Yeah, they're not the only predator that will take cats. I mean, a lot of predators will, but they do definitely take cats. So these animals can live in and amongst people, but as that shrinks more and more and more, the chances of that population surviving, or even that species surviving in there, is probably less and less. So now we get to Dummerston, and again, here's the regional map, which again shows you some of the larger forested blocks, and here's the town map. And then this is a map, this is just a model. So this is not based on any reality. It's based on a model of trying to figure out where the best crossings are. And it's kind of, I find it backwards. I mean, the green is bad and the red is good. Doesn't it seem like it should be the other way around? I mean, it confuses me all the time. But so you can see, this is we have one bear crossing right here that we've identified based on somebody, either it got hit by a car there, and there's a power line right here, and the Camp Arden yard is right in here, right? And then these are probably salamander crossings in here. I mean, you guys would know more about that than I do, but they're identified on the map as salamander crossings. But you can see that there are red places right, here's one, here's another one down here. And I think, Lynn, you were saying, was that crossing right here? That Black Mountain one?
Yeah.
Right in here, so the model, I mean, what we really want to try to do is figure out if this model is at all accurate. And that's what your job will be, is to take the dots when we get to it and go out to those maps and put down where you've seen animals crossing these roads.
Do you have to have seen them, or can you know that they've turned over birdhouses and you've got the tracks in the snow?
If you've got
real bear.
No, if you've got the tracks in the snow and you see where they've crossed the road, that's
and we know where this bear goes.
Sure, that's good enough. And we're really looking for where they are crossing the road. Because these animals will be in people's interior yards and stuff. But what you want to know is, where are they going to get across that road? Yeah.
So I've seen them on 3 occasions crossing Middle Road when I'm driving home, which I live on the top of Middle Road.
Yeah.
And they're right in the same place every time, just before my house, and they go through my yard. Yeah. Through the part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, to get to where they're going.
Yeah. To get to the
and where is that on here?
It's right in Dummerston's center, just a little bit
right in
down
here.
Of just like right down from. It would be right here, see? Right there.
Oh, right there.
It would be right there.
Okay. Huh.
Yeah.
See, I mean, that will be really interesting to see. how, I mean, we can leave, I can put this slide back up and we can sort of check back and forth and see how what you guys come up with matches this model. Because the model isn't necessarily perfect or right. It's just, you know, you put numbers in and you put certain parameters in and this is what gets kicked out. But it gives you a start to think about. And I mean, when you look at this crossing right here, this makes sense when we know that heights of land are often places where animals, they come down off the heights of land and there's a saddle in here and then they come back up, and that's often a place where they'll move across. Here's another spot right here. So, you know, this is where we'll sort of turn it over to you. I made an attempt, and don't get nervous about this. I have no idea if these are really crossings. I just looked at the landscape and said, boy, you know, it looks like if I were going to figure out where an animal like a bobcat might cross the road, it might be right here or right here where there's development on both sides, or here. These may not be right, but it's just how I sort of took a stab at trying to figure out where animals in Dummerston might move from one block to another. So the next steps might be to do this mapping effort out here, and I can explain it or somebody else can. And then I'm going to leave anybody who wants one this book, Mapping Vermont's Natural Heritage. And there's some maps on a disc in here that might be helpful to you. You can put the disc in and look at that. On page 65, there's a chapter on wildlife crossings, which might be helpful. And then, you know, there's some conservation strategies that you might want to think about applying. If you have questions, I think you probably had Jens Hilke come down in the past, but he can help answer some questions. I'm happy to answer them too. And there's the regional planning commissions doing some regional connectivity work that maybe you guys are already involved in, I don't know. But that's also something to be aware of. So they're trying to connect up some areas west of here, I think. So that is that. I can, yeah.
So what we've done is we put a big map out there, and we have 4 different colored dots for 4 different kinds of animals, from bear, bobcat, fox, and fisher.
Okay.
And do you want people to just put one dot if they see a bear, one dot on a road crossing?
Yes.
But if they see like 3 bears, you don't know whether it's the same bear. So
Right, right.
Just one?
Well, I'd put the dot, and if we had a pen, I'd write 3 on the dot.
Okay.
Let's do that. Now, I also have some skins and skulls. What time is it? We could do the dot thing, and I could just get them out, and people could look at them, or I can show them. I'll show you, before you go do the dots, let me just show you the Lynx and the Bobcat, just so you can see. If you ever see one down here, you can tell me that you've looked at the characteristics, and so, because I think you'd be quite impressed.
I know that one.
Okay. So, what's this one?
That's a bobcat.
This is the Bobcat. Now, I mean, this is really just an amazing thing to show you. If you tell me he had big feet, big is relative, so I may not really know for sure that he had big feet, because look at the difference in the size of those feet. I mean, this guy's designed for deep, fluffy snow. This one, when the snow gets deeper than about 5 or 8 inches, he falls right through. He does not do as well. So he's kind of at the northern edge of his range, and he's at the southern edge of his range. And the Bobcat can outcompete this guy when we have snow that has a crust on it. So as climate changes, probably this guy's going to keep moving north. But the thing you look for is the tail. That's right. And it's really pretty obvious. In most cases, when I get pictures, yeah, you can see the difference in the tail. The Bobcat has white under his tail, and that he often curls his tail up so that white is really obvious. The Lynx has an all-black tip, and it seems really subtle, but it's almost a stubbier tail too. See, the Bobcat's got a little bit of a longer tail than the Lynx, and the Lynx's is stubbier, but that black tip really shows up if you can get the back end of the animal. So just something to, I mean, because even they both have ear tufts, so if you say, oh, I had ear tufts, and a Bobcat can actually weigh more than a Lynx. And so, you know, if you tell me it's big and it had big feet and had ear tufts, it's not good enough. If you tell me it had a black tip on its tail, I will say you probably saw a lynx.
What about the
Doesn't the
spots?
bobcat have a
This,
doesn't the bobcat have a much broader diet?
does. Bobcats are much more opportunistic and will eat, you know, just about anything. Yeah. And even kill deer. And this guy's pretty much snowshoe hare. So he's really much more limited. You're right. So that's that one. I'll show you just two more things that you think you might be interested in. This is a eastern coyote. Came east from west of the Mississippi. Wasn't here prior to the 1940s. Not indigenous to Vermont. Weighs about anywhere from 40, well, a male, from 35, say, to maybe a big one, 55 pounds, because it bred with wolves as it came across through Canada. This is a Canis lupus. This is a gray wolf. This one weighed 92 pounds. And he was actually killed in Vermont. And we sent his tissue samples for testing, genetic analysis, and actually it came back that his ancestry was from two distinct population areas. They'd never seen anything like this in the wild, so they were making the assumption that it had been bred in captivity and released. But we also did isotope analysis on the fur, and that really tells you whether it's been eating a carbon-based diet, which would suggest that it had been fed by people. It had never shown any evidence of carbon-based feeding. So if it got released very, very young. I think that the guy that did the testing is still not really sure where this animal came from. I mean, we don't have gray wolves very close to Vermont, and they have to get across the St. Lawrence to get here, which is pretty hard to do these days. It doesn't really ice up very much anymore. But you know, we still have a lot to learn about the canids. Do you have a question? In the 90s. Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. We had another one killed that weighed 72 pounds that was an Eastern Canadian wolf coyote mix. And that one looked like the kind of wolf you might see in Algonquin Park. I don't know if any of you have ever been up there, but they have Eastern Canadian wolves, and that's very close, really, from as far as a wolf goes. That's very close, but it's just getting across the St. Lawrence that's the challenge. Talk about connectivity. They need a bridge for these animals to get here. So, yeah, anyway, yeah.
Well, we were in Canada last year, and we saw all these fantastic bridges that they're building over the interstates for the animals to cross.
Really?
They've got trees on them.
Yeah.
And they've got,
Is that Western Canada or
It was
Eastern?
Western
Canada. Yeah, that's what I think. Some of our agency folks have gone out there to look at some of those.
they're wonderful, and they said
Yeah.
the animals really do
Use them.
And then they also have the kinds of things that
Go under.
things,
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
animals do use
Yeah.
them. It's great.
Yeah.
But these ones over the highway were unbelievable.
Yeah, I have not seen those, but I would love to see them. I think some of our folks have gone out to those conferences and seen them.
I mean, it looks like
I think
woods.
they're really expensive, but
probably are.
yeah, pretty cool. Actually, those of you who have gone from Bennington to Hoosick, there's actually about 3 or 4 large underpasses that AOT put in for movement underneath 270. Is that 279? I think whatever that new highway is that goes into New York. There are underpasses there now that were put in specifically for wildlife movement.
I may find them. So.
Yeah, yeah. So I will leave. I mean, for anybody like the young gentleman over there who might want to go through these, you're welcome to touch them, pull them out if you want, see what's here. Anybody else, you're welcome to, and I'll lay them out so people can see them. But yeah, but we can go in the other room and do your dots. So we'll see what you come up with. Oh, there's cookies. Oh, well that. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Except for the squirrels.
Really? So you're not going down there?
And these guys you know, haven't been picking them up, I guess. I mean, they're right next to the house.
Oh, maybe that's why.
You look at this area though, and you see.
There's some here as far as
Okay,
I've seen bear a couple times crossing.
Well, I
Oh,
see
right
the
there. Well,
bear
put a-
come
put a
right
dot
down
there,
my
Charlie.
drive. They come from the mountain right down my driveway and across into
Connect all this
reeds,
together.
Yeah, yeah.
fields across
Well,
the
this
road.
is conserved. This is conserved.
Yeah, but you've got traffic and houses there.
Yeah.
You walk up, you've been up on this hill
Oh,
with
yeah,
this skiing,
yeah.
and you know there's nothing all the way
Yeah.
through.
Black Mountain Road, so it's
Really
gotta be
nice.
right below Black Mountain Road.
That's
Yeah, right in there.
why I think this is important.
Well, to get it back across to New Hampshire, yeah, yeah.
A red one for bear?
They go under.
He was a big guy.
And you guys never see anything going right like through here. Well, actually, it looks like you do up
The
here.
school has seen things.
Yeah.
And they've brought people into the classes, and I can't remember what they saw, but I think it was bear.
Huh.
You know, should have, somebody should have told you today.
Yeah.
Well, they don't, they get up under, they get up into, well, this is the top of that ridge.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it looks like there's two ridges here.
Okay,
Yeah.
this is the top, this is the part.
My daughter's helped turn. Years ago, 40 years ago. And that's where she was Bobcat. This is where
This road here, the island there, is up above the road. Up here.
well, no.
And, you know, that would have made a nice place for them to cross.
Yeah. Yeah.
The woods over on the other side.
Yeah.
The other place I see deer is the same spot.
It's really interesting.
This used to be all forest, that's what's his name's,
It's right at the intersection, Miller Road and East West.
Yes, married to your sister-in-law. Cherie. What's his name? Patrick.
Patrick.
So what did you say?
Really? I mean, this is interesting here that you've got 4 different species right there.
Well, a friend of mine rescued two cubs up on Miller Road last year. And in fact, I think
Yeah, well, so say, so I mentioned in the beginning, say and soaking, so they have a bad reputation. I said, about a minute in, you're going to say, your job is to anticipate that next. Sometimes you're not going to a whole week. You're looking. Not bringing it for that.
You can't get my hand.
Wintertime, we're collecting right off the snow.